Princess Celine stood alone in the grand hall of her father's palace, her gaze fixed on the sprawling alien city below. The lights from the distant skyscrapers reflected in the polished marble floors, but they did little to comfort her. The silence around her was heavy, and her heart felt as though it were sinking with each passing second. The grandeur of the palace, once a source of pride, now felt like a gilded cage. The vastness of the Varick Empire meant nothing to her. She had never felt more isolated in her life. Lord Hadrick, her father and the ruler of the Varick Empire, stood across from her. He was a towering figure, his dark blue skin gleaming under the harsh lights of the hall. His cold, black eyes locked onto hers, devoid of warmth. His powerful form was the very embodiment of the Varick's strength, their conquest, and their ruthless dominance over the galaxy. There was no softness in his gaze, no hint of affection. His presence filled the room, like an immovable mountain. And yet, in that moment, Celine felt dwarfed by him. Her own father, the man who should have cared for her, was now her judge. "You have disappointed me again, Celine," Lord Hadrick's voice rumbled, thick with frustration. "The other lords of the Empire are growing impatient with your weakness. You are no longer a benefit to the Varick. I cannot allow you to bring shame to our name any longer." Celine's stomach twisted in fear. Her heart raced, but she could barely summon the courage to speak. She had always known that she was different. Her father's empire was built on brutality, on the idea that strength was the only thing worth valuing. The Varick, a race of conquerors, had little use for kindness, compassion, or vulnerability. They valued power, dominance, and fear. But Celine was not like the others. She had never been able to fully embrace the harshness that defined her people. She lacked the ruthlessness that her father and his followers demanded. She lacked the hunger for power, the insatiable drive that made her people formidable. She saw kindness where others saw weakness. She valued understanding over conquest. But to her father, these were the qualities of failure. To him, they made her an embarrassment. The throne of the Varick Empire was never meant for someone like her. Celine's voice trembled as she spoke. "Please, Father, I can still prove myself. Give me another chance. I can do it." Her plea was met with cold silence. Lord Hadrick's gaze hardened, and with a sharp gesture, he silenced her before she could continue. "No," he snapped, cutting her off. "Enough. I have no more time to waste on someone who cannot live up to their purpose. You are nothing more than a failure to the Varick. You will go to Earth." Celine blinked, confusion spreading across her face. "Earth? You want me to go to Earth?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The mention of Earth, the small primitive planet her father had often dismissed as insignificant, shocked her. She had read about the humans there, fragile, emotional, and simple compared to the Varick. But how could she be of use to them? "Yes," her father's cold voice answered, his tone betraying no warmth. "The humans are allies of the Varick Empire, but their loyalty is fragile. They need to be reminded of their place. You will be sent to them as a symbol of our power. They will treat you as an important representative of the Varick Empire, but in truth, you are nothing more than a pawn in this political game. You will stay there until further notice. If you prove useful, they may keep you alive. If not, well, your existence will no longer be necessary." The weight of her father's words struck her like a physical blow. He was sending her away, not as a representative or a diplomat, but as a tool, an object to be used and discarded once it no longer served a purpose. Celine's chest tightened with a mixture of anger, sorrow, and fear. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a sentence. She had no choice in the matter. Her fate had already been decided. She nodded, too afraid to speak, and too numb to resist. What could she say? What could she do? Her father's will was absolute. He had made his decision, and there was nothing she could do to change it. A few days later, Celine found herself on a small transport ship, hurtling through the cold vacuum of space. She stared out of the small window at the stars, feeling the distance between herself and everything she had ever known growing wider with each passing moment. Her mind raced with questions, but there were no answers. What would she find on Earth? Would she be treated as a valuable representative of the Varric, as her father had promised? Or would she be cast aside, forgotten like an old relic, just as her father had intended? The journey was long, and the silence aboard the ship was unbearable. Celine spent her time alone, contemplating her fate. Her thoughts drifted back to her time in the palace, the moments when she had tried so hard to fit in, to live up to her father's expectations. She had always felt out of place. She had never been like the other Varric. She had never shared their hunger for power, their thirst for conquest. She had always longed for something more, something beyond the cold, calculated rule of her father's empire. But now, as she traveled toward Earth, she wondered if she would ever find that something more. Would the humans accept her? Would they see beyond her alien form and the cold politics of her father's empire? Or would they view her as nothing more than a tool, a pawn in their own game of survival? When the ship finally landed on Earth, Celine was escorted off by a group of human soldiers. Their faces were curious but wary. They had no idea what to make of her, and she felt that same sense of alienation settle over her once again. She had never felt more like an outsider, more out of place. Standing at the edge of the landing platform, Celine was met by Captain Ryland Storm. He was tall and strong, with the kind of confidence that only came from years of military service. His eyes scanned her with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. He had heard of the Varric, of their conquests and their power, but he had never expected to meet one of them face to face. "Welcome to Earth," Captain Storm said, his voice firm. "I'm Captain Ryland Storm. I'll be overseeing your stay here." Celine nodded, her heart heavy. She had no idea how to make herself understood in this strange new world. How could she serve her father here? How could she prove her worth to a race of people so different from her own? Captain Storm led her away, and as they walked toward the transport that would take her to her new home, Celine could only wonder what the future held. Would the humans see her as a symbol of power, as her father had hoped? Or would they see her for what she truly was, a lost princess, cast aside and forgotten, trying to find her place in a world that wasn't her own? Her journey had only just begun, and already, Celine knew that it would change her in ways she couldn't yet understand. Celine's arrival on Earth was nothing like what she had expected. As the transport ship's engines hummed softly, the shuttle descended into the atmosphere, and she watched through the small window as the sprawling city below came into view. The lights seemed dim compared to the neon glow of her father's empire, yet there was something about them, something warm, that felt unfamiliar. She had expected to see a planet full of chaos and primitiveness, a world ready to be subdued under the might of the Varric Empire. What she saw instead was vibrant, alive, and pulsing with a strange energy. It was the hum of human life, something she had never experienced before. Once the shuttle landed, a group of soldiers stood waiting to greet her, their uniforms simple but functional. They eyed her with a mix of curiosity and caution, and Celine could sense the tension in the air. They were unsure of what to make of her, just as she was unsure of what to make of them. She had studied human culture during her travels, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of their presence. Their emotions were so raw, so tangible, that it made her feel exposed, vulnerable. The cold, unfeeling atmosphere of the Varric Empire was nowhere to be found here. The humans' openness was both alien and fascinating. Captain Ryland Storm, the leader of the group, approached her with a firm but respectful stride. He was tall, with short-cropped dark hair and eyes that were piercing and calculating. His gaze swept over her, noting every detail of her appearance. Her tall, slender frame, her blue skin, and the silver strands of her hair that shimmered under the light. He had heard of the Varric, of their power, their ruthlessness, but seeing one in person was another matter entirely. His lips twitched slightly as he tried to mask his unease. "Welcome to Earth," he said, his voice even but firm. "I'm Captain Ryland Storm. I'll be overseeing your stay here for the duration of your assignment." Celine nodded silently. She had no idea what her assignment entailed, only that it was another in a long list of instructions her father had given her. There was no warmth in her father's voice when he sent her here, only a cold sense of finality. Earth was just another political maneuver, a way to show power, to remind the humans who ruled the galaxy. But Celine had already begun to wonder if there was something more to this place, something that went beyond the cold calculations of the Varick Empire. The soldiers escorted her to a waiting transport vehicle, and as the door closed behind them, Celine was once again alone with her thoughts. The hum of the engine beneath her was the only sound as they drove through the city, passing buildings that ranged from sleek, futuristic designs to older, more traditional structures. It was clear that Earth was a planet caught between progress and tradition, a blend of the old and new. The streets were alive with people, and she could hear snippets of their conversations drifting through the open windows. She listened carefully, trying to catch the rhythm of their words, their emotions. She had learned about the human's emotional depth in her studies, but to experience it firsthand was overwhelming. When they reached the small apartment that Captain Storm had arranged for her, Celine stepped out of the transport and into the bustling streets. There were humans everywhere, walking in every direction, their faces animated with laughter or focused in deep thought. Children ran past her, their eyes wide with curiosity, while adults glanced at her with a mixture of interest and confusion. None of them seemed afraid. They didn't recoil at her alien features. They simply stared in fascination, as if she were something new, something to be discovered. Inside the apartment, Celine was greeted with a simple, clean space. It was nothing like the opulent palaces of her father's empire, with their gold-inlaid furniture and grandiose decorations. There were no towering walls, no imposing statues. Instead, there was warmth, soft lighting, comfortable furnishings, and a sense of openness that she had never known. The apartment was quiet, with only the occasional sound of traffic or people speaking from the streets below. It was a far cry from the sterile, militaristic environment she was used to, and it left her feeling oddly unsettled. As the days passed, Celine found herself observing the humans more and more, trying to make sense of them. She spent her time in the apartment, watching them from the windows, trying to decode their behaviors. Humans were unpredictable, driven by their emotions in ways that the Varick could never understand. They laughed with each other, argued passionately, and formed deep bonds that transcended race and species. It was a stark contrast to the Varick, who valued strength and control above all else. Celine couldn't help but feel like an outsider, a spectator in a world that was so foreign to her. She didn't belong here, not in the way the humans did. Yet there was something about them that intrigued her. They had a certain resilience, an inner strength that came from their willingness to feel, to care for one another despite their weaknesses. The more she watched, the more she found herself drawn to their lives. The way they celebrated even the smallest joys, the way they rallied together in times of struggle. One afternoon, Celine ventured out of the apartment, feeling the need to experience more of Earth. She wandered through the streets, taking in the sights, sounds, and smells of the city. The streets were lined with shops, cafes, and bustling marketplaces. The air was thick with the sense of food, something savory, something sweet, and the sounds of conversations in a dozen different languages. Humans were everywhere, living, talking, and moving with a vibrancy that was both overwhelming and oddly comforting. As she walked, a group of children spotted her. Their eyes widened as they stared up at her, and for a moment, Celine froze. She wasn't sure what to do. She had never been treated like this before, like a curiosity, something to be stared at. The children whispered excitedly to one another, pointing at her, and before Celine could move away, one of them stepped forward. "Hi," the little girl said brightly, her voice full of innocence. "Are you an alien?" Celine blinked in surprise. It wasn't the question that startled her. It was the lack of fear in the girl's voice. The child didn't see her as a threat. She saw her as something fascinating, something new to explore. Celine nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." The girl's eyes lit up, and she grinned. "Cool. What's your name?" "Celine," she answered softly, surprised by the sudden warmth that welled up inside her. "Do you want to play with us?" the girl asked eagerly. "We're playing tag." Celine hesitated. Play. The Varric had no concept of play. They saw it as a waste of time, something frivolous, unworthy of attention. But something about the girl's invitation, her genuine curiosity, tugged at Celine's heart. Perhaps this was the human way. An openness, a willingness to accept even the unknown. Before Celine could decline, another child tossed a small, colorful ball her way. The gesture was simple, but it was also a sign of inclusion. With a deep breath, Celine caught the ball awkwardly, her fingers unsure of how to hold it. The children laughed, not in mockery, but in a friendly, encouraging way. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Celine felt something she had never felt before: acceptance. She played with the children for an hour, stumbling through the rules of their strange game but finding joy in the experience. The humans cheered her on, not caring that she wasn't good at it. They didn't see her as an alien. They saw her as someone who was learning, trying, just like them. The warmth of their kindness was overwhelming, and for the first time, Celine felt a spark of something she hadn't known she needed: belonging. As she walked back to her apartment later that evening, Celine reflected on the experience. The humans didn't see her as a tool to be used, as her father had intended. They saw her as a person, a being with the capacity to feel, to grow, to change. She didn't know yet where her place in this world would be, but she was beginning to think that perhaps Earth could offer her more than the Varric Empire ever had. The days following Celine's first experience with Earth's warmth passed in a quiet haze. Her time spent with the humans, especially the children she had met, was transforming her in ways she had never expected. They welcomed her with open arms, treating her as one of their own despite the stark differences in appearance and origins. The warmth of their acceptance was like a balm to her soul, soothing the loneliness that had plagued her since childhood. However, even as she began to feel a sense of belonging on Earth, she knew her past was never far behind. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of the heavy burden she carried. "Prove yourself, or you will be discarded." These words haunted her every waking moment. She was a pawn, a symbol sent to Earth by Lord Hadric, her father, to serve a political purpose. Yet, despite the kindness she had encountered on Earth, a nagging fear lingered in the back of her mind. Would she ever be truly accepted? Could she ever escape the shadow of her father's empire? Celine was sitting in her small apartment one evening, reading a human history book she had found in the local library, when her communicator beeped. The sudden noise broke her concentration, and her heart skipped a beat. It was a secure message from the Varric Empire. She felt a chill run down her spine as she activated the device. The message was brief, encrypted, and laced with a sense of urgency. "Princess Celine, a rogue faction of the Varric Empire has launched an attack on one of Earth's colonies. You are to remain neutral. Do not interfere." Her heart pounded in her chest as she read the message over and over. A rogue faction. Her people, the Varric, attacking Earth. The very same humans who had accepted her, who had shown her kindness when she had been nothing more than a pawn in her father's game. The thought of it was unbearable. She had known that her father's empire was ruthless, but to see her own people, the ones she had once called her own, turn against the humans in such a brutal way filled her with an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Celine sat back in her chair, her fingers trembling as she set the communicator down. She couldn't do this. She couldn't just stand by while her own kind attacked the humans, the people who had offered her a sense of belonging, who had given her the chance to be more than just a tool for conquest. She had already made the choice to be different from the Varric, to embrace the warmth of Earth, to reject the cold logic of her people. This was a test of her loyalty, of her beliefs, and she wasn't going to fail it. The decision was clear, though the consequences were unknown. She couldn't stand by while the humans were attacked. She had learned too much, felt too much, to let her people destroy the fragile peace that Earth had worked so hard to build. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant betraying her father and everything the Varick Empire stood for. Captain Ryland Storm was waiting for her the next morning when she left her apartment. His face was unreadable, but Celine could sense the tension in his posture. She had kept to herself for the past few days, but the tension in the air was palpable. The humans must have known something was coming. There were whispers of an attack, but no one knew exactly when it would happen. As Celine approached him, Captain Storm's sharp eyes met hers. "There's been a change in plans," he said without preamble. "We've received word from one of our colonies on Titan. It's under attack. We don't know all the details yet, but it's bad. We need to move fast." Celine's heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to hear more. She already knew. Her father's rogue faction had come for Earth. She could feel it in her bones. She had to act, and she had to act now. "I'll go with you," Celine said, her voice steady, though her mind raced. "I know their tactics. I know how they fight. I can help you stop them before it's too late." Captain Storm looked at her, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. He had never fully trusted her, and she didn't blame him. She was an alien, a representative of the very people who had launched the attack. But he had seen her fight alongside the humans before. He had seen the spark in her eyes, the same spark of determination that now burned brighter than ever. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. Celine nodded. "I can't just stand by. The Varick might not care about Earth, but I do. I can help." Captain Storm was silent for a moment, as if weighing her words. Then, with a sharp nod, he gestured for her to follow him. "Then let's move. We're running out of time." They boarded a transport ship headed for Titan, the human colony under siege. The journey felt long and tense, the weight of what they were about to face hanging heavily in the air. Celine sat in the corner, her mind racing with plans and strategies. She had grown up studying the Varick's methods of warfare, tactics of destruction, of overwhelming force. The Varick were efficient, merciless, and they had no qualms about using terror to achieve their goals. She knew that the humans, despite their bravery and ingenuity, would be outmatched if they weren't prepared. When the ship finally landed on Titan, the scene before them was nothing short of chaos. Buildings were burning, and the air was thick with smoke. The once thriving colony was now a war zone. Celine could hear the distant sounds of gunfire and explosions, the harsh reality of the battle unfolding before her. The humans were doing what they could, but it was clear that they were outnumbered. The Varick were ruthless, and they were not about to show mercy. "This is it," Captain Storm said, his voice grim. "We need to push them back now." Celine's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the battlefield. She could feel the presence of the Varick soldiers as they moved through the colony. Their tactics were as brutal as ever, attacking with overwhelming force, leaving no room for the humans to fight back. She could hear the sound of their heavy boots on the ground, their weapons at the ready. But Celine knew what they would do next. She had seen it countless times before. "We need to draw them into a trap," Celine said, her voice steady with confidence. "They will push forward, trying to break through our defenses. We can use that. We can trap them in the narrow streets, force them into a chokehold. They won't know what hit them." Captain Storm nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. "All right, let's do it your way." They moved quickly, rallying the human soldiers and setting up defensive positions. Celine guided them through the streets, directing them with precision, her knowledge of Varick tactics giving them the advantage. They set traps, lured the enemy into narrow alleys, and ambushed them with surprise attacks. It wasn't easy, and the cost was high, but slowly they began to push the Varick back. The tide of the battle was turning, and Celine could feel the shift in the air. The Varick soldiers, caught off guard by the humans' ability to adapt and fight back, began to retreat. Their ranks faltered as they realized they were no longer in control. The humans had learned from their mistakes, and with Celine's guidance, they were winning. The once terrifying Varric, who had come to Earth expecting to crush their enemies with ease, were now scrambling to hold their ground. When the battle finally ended, Celine stood among the rubble of the colony, her chest heaving from exhaustion. The humans had won, but at a great cost. Buildings were destroyed, and many lives had been lost. But they had survived, and they had fought together. As Captain Storm approached her, his face weary but filled with gratitude, he spoke quietly. "You did it. You saved us." Celine nodded, her heart heavy with the knowledge that this victory, while sweet, was only temporary. Her father would not forgive her betrayal. The Varric would not stop their campaign. But for now, Earth was safe, and that was enough. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in her life, Celine felt like she had chosen the right path. She wasn't a pawn anymore. She was something more, something stronger. And whatever came next, she would face it with the humans, standing side by side. The aftermath of the battle was bittersweet. Celine stood on the balcony of the human command center, her gaze drifting over the shattered remnants of Titan's colony. The damage was extensive, and yet there was a sense of resilience in the air. The humans were cleaning up, rebuilding, and tending to the wounded. There was no time to mourn, no time for regret. Their world had been under siege, but they had fought back with everything they had. For the first time in her life, Celine felt a strange sense of pride. She had not fought for herself. She had fought for them, Earth's people. The humans had shown her warmth and kindness when she had been nothing more than a foreigner in their world. They had trusted her, fought alongside her, and treated her as an equal. The Varric Empire had never offered her such acceptance. Her father's empire, with its cold logic and ruthless rule, had always expected her to fit into a mold, to conform to their rigid ideals of power and strength. But the humans, despite their own flaws, had embraced her for who she truly was. Yet, even in the midst of their triumph, Celine could not shake the fear gnawing at her heart. The Varric Empire was not defeated. Her father's ships, though forced to retreat from Earth's defenses, would return. She knew it. The Varric were relentless, and Lord Hadric would not forgive her betrayal. She had defied him, had chosen to stand with the humans instead of fulfilling her duty as a princess of the Varric, and for that, there would be consequences. She could already hear her father's voice in her head, cold and unforgiving. "Prove yourself, or be discarded." "Celine, you're needed in the command center." Captain Ryland Storm's voice cut through her thoughts. He had been by her side throughout the battle, and though his face was worn with exhaustion, there was a glimmer of respect in his eyes. She turned to face him, her heart heavy with the weight of the choices she had made. "I know," she said softly. "I just need a moment." Ryland nodded, understanding. He had seen the internal struggle in her eyes since the moment she had decided to defy her own people. He knew that her decision was not an easy one. She had chosen Earth, but that choice had not come without sacrifice. She had severed ties with everything she had ever known, with her bloodline, her heritage, and her father's expectations. "I know what you're thinking," Ryland said quietly. "But you made the right choice. You didn't choose Earth out of weakness or fear. You chose it because you believe in something greater than power or dominance. You believe in freedom, in fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. And that's why we're standing here today." Celine met his gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude. He understood. He knew that her choice had been difficult, that it had cost her more than she could ever explain. But now, as she looked around at the humans working tirelessly to rebuild their world, she knew that there was no turning back. She had made her decision. And for the first time, she felt like she had a place, a purpose beyond her father's empire. "Thank you, Ryland," she said softly. "But the hardest part is yet to come." Ryland raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The Varric will be back," Celine said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "And when they come, they will come with all their might. My father won't let this go. He won't let me betray him without consequences." Ryland's face darkened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll be ready. We faced them once. We can do it again." Celine looked out over the colony once more, the setting sun casting a golden hue across the wreckage. She knew Ryland was right. The humans were resilient, and they had proven that they could stand against the might of the Varric. But the coming battle would be different. The Varric had already shown that they could adapt, that they would learn from their mistakes. And Celine feared that the next attack would be far more brutal. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Celine turned to find Lieutenant Kieran, a trusted human officer who had fought alongside her during the battle, walking toward them. His face was grim, and there was a wariness in his eyes that Celine didn't fully understand. "Captain, Celine," Kieran said, his voice low. "We've received some troubling news. We've intercepted communications from the Varric. Their fleet is on its way, and they're bringing reinforcements. We have maybe a day, two at most, to prepare." Celine's stomach tightened. The Varric were coming sooner than expected. Her father had not wasted any time. He would not stop until she had been brought back into the fold, or until Earth had been brought to its knees. "What's the plan?" Ryland asked, his tone firm, but there was a sense of urgency in his words now. The battle was far from over. The humans were not prepared for another full-scale invasion. Their defenses, though strong, had been severely weakened by the previous attack. They had to act quickly if they were to survive. "We've begun fortifying the colony's defenses," Kieran said, his eyes meeting Celine's. "But it's not enough. The Varric fleet is too powerful. We need to strike back, and we need to do it now. Celine, we need your help." Celine nodded, her mind already racing with strategies. The Varric were formidable, but she had knowledge of their tactics, of their weaknesses. She had seen firsthand how they fought, how they moved. And though her knowledge was born of years spent under the oppressive rule of her father's empire, it was now her weapon against them. "I know their tactics," Celine said, her voice steady. "We can use their arrogance against them. They won't expect us to hit back so soon. We need to sabotage their fleet, hit their communication systems, and disable their engines. If we can cripple their ships before they land, we can force them to retreat." Ryland's eyes lit up with determination. "We'll do it together. We can't let them take Earth." Celine felt a surge of resolve. She had made her choice. She had chosen Earth, not out of weakness, but out of strength. She had chosen to fight for a future where kindness, compassion, and freedom were valued more than power and conquest. But the time for peaceful solutions was over. The Varric were coming, and she was ready to stand by the humans, ready to defend this world that had given her so much. "I'm with you," Celine said firmly. "Let's end this." The final battle was fast approaching. As the Varric ships descended upon the colony, the humans rallied together, stronger than ever. Celine led the charge, guiding the soldiers with precision, using her knowledge of the Varric strategies to outmaneuver them at every turn. The battle was fierce, the stakes higher than ever. But in the end, Earth stood victorious once more. As the dust settled, and the Varric fleet retreated, Celine knew that the fight was far from over. There would be more battles, more struggles. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. She had made her choice, and no matter what the future held, she would face it as part of something greater than herself. Celine had found her place. She had chosen Earth, and she would defend it with everything she had. The final choice had been made, and it had been the right one.